So this is my final project, and what my application does is that, first of all, whenever a user swipes a credit card, all the information about the purchase itself is sent to a backend server, and then the server could either check for the validity of the transaction and could either approve the transaction or reject the transaction. And that's what my application basically does. So I'll talk about the basic architecture and then we'll go over for a demo. If we take a look at the front end first, the front end, you can see a space where it says the user side. What the user side does is that whenever a user swipes a credit card, all the user information, the location of purchase, and the amount of purchase data will be sent to an API gateway. The API gateway will then feed the data to Kafka. And whenever Kafka consumes the data, it will then trigger a Lambda function. And then what the Lambda function does is that it basically checks for the validity of all the transactions, and it could either approve the transaction if it's valid, and it could reject the transaction if it is invalid. And all the approved transactions will be saved in a DynamoDB, and all the rejected transactions will also be saved in a separate DynamoDB. And then the Lambda function will send all the transactional information to the administrator. So coming back to the front end again, it says the admin side here. The administrator so whenever a user swipes a credit card, the administrator is able to see all the rejected transaction that has happened today and all the approved transaction that has happened today, and also see all the revenue that has been created from the approved transactions today. So this is basically the architecture of how my project works, and I'd like to show you a demo now. As said, coming back to the front, this is the front end side, and you can see that we can see a space where it says the user side. And whenever a user swipes a credit card, the user ID, the purchase location, and the purchase amount is sent. Now, checking for the validity of the user ID, the user ID must start with a capital U. And whatever data that comes after the character U is considered valid. And for the purchase location, it must be a string to be considered valid. And for the purchase amount, it must be a float to be considered valid. So from now on, I'll try to create a couple of transactions, valid transactions, and let's see how the data changes. So again, coming back to the user ID, if it starts with U, it's valid. And for the purchase location, if it's a string, it is valid. So I'll type in New York, and for the purchase amount, I'll type in $123.11. So we'll send this data. And whenever it is successfully sent, it says you have successfully sent the data for this user ID. And in here, we can see that from the list, we can see the approved transactions here. It says U123 New York 123.1. And then in the total approved transactions amount, we can see the total amount of revenue that has been created from the approved transactions. So I'll try to make a couple of more approved transactions here. And let's see how that works. Again, I have another approved transaction here. And as you can see, the total amount for approved transaction has increased by $100. Okay, so here, and then you can see that the total amount has been increased. Let's create a couple of invalid transactions. So whenever an invalid transaction is sent, you can see that the transaction has been rejected, and it shows the user ID, the location, and the amount, and also the reason for the rejection. It says the user ID does not start with you. Okay, we'll make sure that it starts with you. And what if we put an integer here? We'll send the data again, and you can also see that the user location is not a string data type. So we know that a transaction has been rejected. We'll put in New York again, and then what if you put a string here? You can see that we have another rejection saying that the user amount is not a float. So So for another approved transaction, we can see that the transaction has been approved here and the total amount of approved transaction has been increased. So basically, whenever a user creates data, the administrator is able to see all of the transactions, whether it's approved or whether it's rejected. And then if you take a look at the way it works is that, again, whenever a user creates data here, it will send the data to Kafka through an API, and then the API, and once the Kafka consumes the information, it will trigger the Kafka project, the Lambda function here. So data is fed into MSK. MSK then triggers the Lambda function, and then the Lambda function will then check for the validity of the transaction and save all the transaction information in the success table or the fail table. So in the success table, we'll be able to see all the transactions that has been approved, and in the fail table, we'll be able to see all the transactions that has been rejected. So this is my overall project. Thank you very much.